believe that a big blue star is going to come and destroy the earth. I think NASA is probably on that trail more than any. And in Norse mythology, they believe the world is going to end when the gods start fighting each other. They are going to destroy the world. So in most religions, there is a final end to the world. All right, background. We're studying the Gospel of Mark, and it can be divided into 3 sections. We've talked about that before. The first section, Mark sets the stage by saying, this is the Son of God, Jesus Christ. Who is this man? The third section is the one that we started last week, and that's the last week of Christ's life as he approaches the cross. We call it the Passion Week. He enters into Jerusalem knowing that this is going to be resulting in his death on the cross. And in chapter 13, Jesus answers some questions about the end times. Now, the fact that this really is the last that we see of his teaching, so this is really an important thing for him to talk about. So, when they're walking, I'm going to set the stage for this. They're leaving the temple. This is pretty much what they were seeing. And they were coming out this gate here, which is the east gate. And they were walking down into the valley. And as they did, one of the disciples looked back and he said to Jesus, "Wow! Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And Jesus replied to him, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one is going to be thrown down." So then they get to the Mount of Olives. They come out of the temple east gate, walk down into the valley, Kidron Valley, and then up past the Garden of Gethsemane, up to the top of the Mount of Olives, which is where they're going to spend the night. They're sitting there on the Mount of Olives looking at the sunset and looking at the temple and the city of Jerusalem off in the distance. And Jesus begins to be questioned by 4 of his disciples. He was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple. Peter, James, John, and Andrew ask him privately. They ask, "Tell us." 2 questions. 1, when will these things happen, this tearing down of the temple? And what will be the sign so that we'll know it's about to be fulfilled? So what we're going to do is we're going to read Jesus' answer to those questions. It's in the chapter 13, verses 5 through 37. And for those of you who can't remember this whole chapter, I am going to break it apart for us after we read it. Jesus said to them, number 1, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name claiming I am he. In other words, many are going to come and say that they are the Messiah. And they're going to deceive many people. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be upset by that. Such things are going to have to happen, but the end is still yet to come. Nation is going to rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. Do we have all of those now? These are the beginnings of birth pains, but they're not the end. You must be on your guard, he says. You will be handed over to the local councils and you'll be flogged in the synagogues. And on account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel first must be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, don't worry beforehand about what you're going to say. Just say whatever is given to you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but it is the Holy Spirit. Brother is going to betray brother and to death, and a father is child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm till the end will be saved. And when you see the abomination, this is where he's getting to the end, okay? When you see this is the sign, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it doesn't belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house or take anything out. Let no one in the field go back for their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those will be the days of great distress, unequaled from the beginning when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if any one of you says, look, here is the Messiah, look, there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders. We know them to be the Antichrist and the beast, to deceive the elect, if possible. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time, but in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. The whole world begins to wind down. The whole universe begins to wind down. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. We're back to fig trees. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near, right at the door. In other words, it's not going to be long from this sign that he's talking about, which is the abomination of desolation. It's not going to take very long from that till the very end. It's going to be very quickly. It's going to happen very quickly. Now learn this lesson with the fig tree. As soon as the twigs get tender and the leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happen, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth are going to pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about the day or the hour, nobody knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man who goes away, leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you don't know when the owner of the house will come back, whether it is in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or at dawn. Now, those 4 times turns out to be the watches for the Roman army. The watch started at 6, went to 9, from 9 to 12, from 12 to 3, which, by the way, brings up a point. If a rooster crows at 3 o'clock in the morning, why would anybody want a rooster? Just a question, just a question. Off the topic, but it is a great question. It's kind of like a cat. They get up at 3 o'clock too. Okay. Therefore, keep watch, because you don't know when the owner of the house is going to come back, whether in the evening or midnight, etc. If he comes suddenly, don't let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. I want you to remember that last sentence, because we're going to come back to it at the end. If he comes suddenly, don't let him find you sleeping. When I say to you, I say to everyone, stay awake, watch. Stay awake, watch. All right? That's going to come back as a bit of comedy at the end. So what can we learn? That was a lot of stuff, and none of it sounded very much fun to me. And then when you go to Daniel and you go to Revelation and you get the integrated, intimate details of these desperate times, it is even less fun. It's not going to be a pretty end for the world. So, the original question was about the destruction of the temple. Remember, Jesus said, no stone's going to be left on another. They get all the way up to the Mount of Olives, and then 4 of the disciples come and they say, we've been talking about this. Could you let us know when this is going to happen and what's going to be the sign that it's about to happen? And then Jesus gives them this huge answer that was way more information than they were asking for. So we're going to take a look at why he told them all this and what that has to do with the destruction of the temple. The original question was about the temple, but that event was just a precursor, an example of a far greater event that Jesus is talking about here, which is the day of the Lord, or what we usually call the last days or the end times. So lesson number 1. The Jews wanted a Messiah that would get rid of the Romans, right? That's what they were interested in. We want you to be our king, and we want you to get the Romans out of here, instead of one who would restore their relationship to God. So we see a deception. Man craves a Messiah who's going to fix his perceived earthly problems, not their real spiritual problems. You with me? So the Messiah that most people want is going to be one who will solve their earthly problems. That's what most people are looking for in a politician, in a king, in a president, in a Messiah. Somebody that's going to solve their problems. For the Jews, it was, we want you to get rid of the Romans. And as a result, when Jesus came and said, I'm here to be a substitute for you so that you can have a restored relationship to God, they said, thanks, but no thanks. We're really more interested in getting rid of these Roman occupiers. And oh, by the way, you annoy us, so we're going to put you on a cross and kill you. So they rejected Jesus, they rejected God's offer, and instead we're looking for a way to get the Romans out of there. And people today are looking for good things. None of these things are bad things. World peace. Wouldn't it be great if we could find somebody that could bring us world peace? Wow, would that not be awesome? How about a clean environment? That would be tremendous. I can't wait to buy an electric car so that I don't burn any more gasoline. That's going to be a fun thing to do if I can find a place to plug it in. But wouldn't it be great to have clean air and clean oceans? And that would be an awesome thing. No poverty. Wouldn't it be super if nobody was poor and nobody was homeless? Wouldn't it be great if everybody had all that they needed? And health care for all. How could you be against having health care for people who are sick, no matter what they could afford or not afford? That's a wonderful thing to look for, and no discrimination. God's word says that we are all the same in his eyes. Wouldn't it be great if the world could say that about everybody? That we're all to be respected. We're to all be acknowledged for who we are. That would be great. And in summary, every other earthly problem that we've got, that's not a bad thing. But it doesn't solve the biggest problem that we've got, and that is that we're alienated from our Creator. And that's what the Messiah came to fix, our Messiah. So Jesus gives us a warning. Jesus said to them, watch out that nobody deceives you. Many are going to come in my name claiming that I am he, and they'll deceive many. In other words, there are going to be great presidents, and there are going to be great kings, and there are going to be great people who will want to solve all your problems, but let me tell you, it's not me. They're going to deceive many. And Mark chapter 13, 21 through 23 says, at that time, if anybody says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear, and they're going to even be powerful. They're going to perform magical things and magic signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I've told you everything ahead of time. So the first lesson is this. The Messiah came to restore our relationship to God. We typically look for somebody to solve our earthly problems, and that's what the Jews did. Lesson number 2, this is a limited offer. Every time I buy a car, they have this offer of a warranty. And the warranty is, it's good for 5 years or 50,000 miles, whichever comes first. Well, this is an offer from God to restore his relationship with us, but it's limited. It's limited in time. And like a car, 5 years or 50,000 miles, this one's limit is one of two things. It's either when God comes and destroys the world, the offer is no longer valid, or when you die. So it's 50,000 miles or 5 years. Those are your two choices. And in this case, it's the end of the world or it's the end of your life. And in those two cases, the offer expires. At the expiration of the offer, he's going to judge those who reject the offer, and he's going to ultimately destroy what he created, which is the entire universe. Time runs out eventually. For the Jews, it ran out 40 years after Christ was rejected. That 40 number is pretty interesting. usually is a complete time of trial or testing. And 40 years after Jesus was crucified was AD 70. And in AD 70, Titus came in with an army and destroyed Jerusalem. And not one stone was left upon the other, and over 1 million Jews were killed. It started in AD 66 when the Jews rebelled against the Romans, killing 6,000 Roman soldiers in Jerusalem. And in 68, Vespasian was sent by Emperor Nero to fix the problem. But then, before he could get the job done, Nero died and Vespasian was made the emperor. But Vespasian had a son whose name was Titus. And in 70 AD, Titus destroys Jerusalem and the Jewish nation is dispersed and destroyed. And it was a time of great suffering and tribulation. But it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of their nation. Time runs out eventually for the rest of the world. It ran out for the Jews in 70 AD. It runs out for us at some point in the future. That's the rest of the world. Mark 13, 19, and 20. Because those days will be days of distress, unequaled from the beginning when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. This is a little worse than a conquering Roman army. This is really bad stuff. If the Lord hadn't cut short those days, nobody would have made it. For the sake of the elect whom he had chosen, he has shortened them. The Great Tribulation is explained in Daniel and Revelation in detail. But let me just save you some time. You don't want to be there for it. It's really not a very pleasant thing. It's awful. Not only is it going to run out eventually, it's going to run out unexpectedly. The example that we're given here in the book of Luke, when he's capturing this moment, is he compares it to the days of Noah, where people were getting married, giving in marriage, eating, drinking, having a great time, and then they woke up one morning and it was raining. Okay, and that was it. Time's over, warranty's up, and it was a surprise to them. It reminds me of last Sunday, remember all the rain that we got? In Mark 13:32, but about that day or hour nobody knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. It's going to come unexpectedly. But we are going to have a sign. It may be unexpected, the day or the hour, but the season is going to be clear. The example that Mark gives, or Jesus gives in Mark, is that when the fig tree blooms, you know that summer is near. And in Luke, it says when the trees bloom. So it's not hard to figure out when summer's coming, right? You see the flowers come up, my nose gets stopped up. I can tell you when it's going to be spring because of my sinus trouble. Now, when did it happen for Jerusalem? And the answer is, this is the way Luke spells it out. The armies of Rome, you remember when Jesus says the abomination of desolation? Okay, and when we go to Revelation, we know that is the Antichrist standing in the temple, or the beast, either one. Okay, well, we know that something's in the temple that shouldn't be in the temple, and right now we don't even have a temple, so we know that sign is a little bit off in the distance. But in AD 70, it wasn't an abomination in the temple. It was a desolation of the army surrounding it. And Luke says it this way: the armies of Rome surrounding Jerusalem was the first sign. It says in Luke 21:20, the desolation is near. When they saw the army of Rome around the city of Jerusalem, that was their sign that it was near, that the desolation was coming. Now, I don't know if I covered it later, but let me just cover it now. The good news, and this is the really good news for the church in Jerusalem, the church in Jerusalem knew this story. You with me? They may or may not have read it, but it had been passed down to them. The church in Jerusalem, run by James or Peter, knew this story. When the army surrounds Jerusalem, get out of town. It's going to get ugly. And in fact, the early Christian writers say that the church fled Jerusalem and they were spared because of this warning that Jesus gave them. So Jesus gave them a warning about Jerusalem, and they fled and were spared. So the believers were spared. What about us? The abomination that causes desolation is going to be our warning sign. Since we don't have a temple, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Since the sign occurs, once it occurs, it's going to happen quickly. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. So if you're alive when the temple's built and the abomination's standing there, if that's your generation, you'll still be alive when it happens, when the end is happening. It's not going to take 1,000 years or 100 years or even 10 years. It's going to be 7 years, and then ba-boom, it's done, and then Jesus is back. So it's going to be very, very fast. Similar to how quick it was when the Romans took Jerusalem. They just came in, took it, conquered it, and it was done. Okay, I did have it later. At the end, so that's the end of the Jerusalem, and the church escaped. But what about us? Because we're talking about two things. We're talking about Jerusalem and it being destroyed, and then we're talking about the world and it being destroyed. Jerusalem is about the Jews. The world is about everybody else. And the answer is in Mark 13:27, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. It's spelled out a little more clearly in 1 Thessalonians, where Paul says, after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. So that's called the rapture. There are three views on when the rapture is going to happen. And by the way, I'm not smart enough, even if I did stay in a Holiday Inn Express, to figure this out, okay? But this is called pre-tribulation, and what it says is that Jesus is going to come and snatch the believers, the ones who have already died and the ones who are still alive, back to heaven with him, and then there's going to be a 7-year period of tribulation, and then Jesus is going to come back, and there's going to be a 1,000-year reign, and then the earth gets destroyed, a new creation happens, and we're all going to live forever with Jesus. That's pre-trib. Mid-trib says that right in the middle of the tribulation, when it's really, really getting bad, Jesus comes and raptures the church. So that before we're all killed, he comes and takes us back. And then the second thing happens, second coming, millennium, last judgment. Post-tribulation says that we're in it for the long haul, and I don't get that out of the Jerusalem thing. The Jerusalem story says that they were warned ahead of time and they fled and they were spared, okay? I lean more towards the pre or the mid than I do this one. This one says the church is going to have to suffer through all 7 years, which is brutal. Like a third of the people in the world, you're talking 3 or 4 billion people are going to die in this tribulation period. And so I just wanted to give you the fact that there are several different opinions about how this is going to happen. So lesson number one, we understand it's going to be the end, and people are going to chase after messiahs that really aren't messiahs, and we got to keep them refocused. No, the world is not going to end in 12 years because of pollution, okay, but we understand pollution's bad, but you really should be thinking about your soul instead of pollution. You know, healthcare is great, and we want healthcare, but you need to think about the health of your spirit also. So our job is to refocus people towards the real Messiah and not the one that's going to get rid of the Romans. So what do? What's our job? And the answer is we're to be a light. We're to be godly people. We really have a job to do. He said the owner goes away and leaves the servants, but he leaves them with a responsibility. And we've been left with a responsibility. Live godly lives in Luke 21. Tell people the good news in Mark 13. And expect to be rejected and persecuted in Mark 13 also. He says, everybody's going to turn against you. Everybody's going to hate you. Well, when you try to get their attention off of whatever earthly Messiah that they really, really want onto the godly Messiah that they really, really need, they're going to get mad at you. And that's okay. That's okay. Jesus ends it with, don't fall asleep, keep a watch. Throughout this Gospel of Mark, I've been a little hard on the apostles. And for that, I apologize. I've called them slow. I've called them thick-headed. You know, and I suspect that when I get to heaven, I'm going to have to answer for a lot of the things that I said about them. But before I get off that subject, let me give it one more shot. The next night, 24 hours from now, Jesus is going to be in the Garden of Gethsemane. He just got through a day earlier telling them what? Don't fall asleep. Be alert. Keep watch. 24 hours later, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says to Peter and James and John, I want you guys to come over here and stay awake and keep watch. Right? And he goes back, he goes to pray, and he comes back, and what's going on? They're sound asleep. So then he goes back and prays some more. He wakes them up. I said, stay awake and keep watch. He goes back, prays some more, comes back, and what? They're asleep again. This is 24 hours after he ends this discussion by saying to everybody, you know, as the end comes, you need to stay awake and keep watch. Do you find that humorous? I find it absolutely hysterical. You know, why? And the answer is because they're just sheep, and he's a great shepherd. They're just people, and he's God. They screw up, and he forgives. His grace is sufficient. And you know, this sounds like a difficult job to do for all of us between now and the end times, but I'm telling you, his grace is sufficient. His love is overwhelming. He has overcome the world and everything in it. Because of that, we don't have to get under this huge burden of responsibility, knowing that even the apostles couldn't hang on to it for more than 24 hours, but we still need to remind ourselves that this is a job that we need to do. Summary. I got two summaries, part 1 and part 2. And then we're out of here. Part 1. It's a fascinating topic. People get excited about it. The pastor just finished a huge study, I think almost a year in Revelation. A lot of people came to that. And a lot of people like talking about the end times. It's a fascinating subject to talk about. Everybody, including scientists, agree that the world is going to end. They just recently were able to take a picture of a black hole, which basically is the end of part of the universe. Everything gets sucked up, all nuclear material goes away, it's just ceased to exist, or it exists in some form that we don't understand. So even scientists know that it's all winding down and their black holes are going to absorb everything and it's all going to cease to exist. Their time frame is way out there, though. I don't think that's God's time frame, but everybody, secularists, scientists, all of the religions of the world believe it's going to end. The Bible says that God's going to destroy the world and judge all people. He's said it since the beginning. He said it with Noah. Okay? He's said it all through the Old Testament. He's said it all through the New Testament. Judgment is coming. The question that he's going to ask, I don't know what finals were like with you. It depended on the course for me. My mathematics finals were usually 10 problems that were very, very difficult, and I had to show my work. Instead of just guessing at the answer, I had to show my work. The English final, we didn't do a lot of English. I was in engineering school, but with the few English courses I had, it was usually one scenario, one question. Explain this. And then they gave you 3 hours to figure out what you're going to say. This is going to be a final exam, and God's going to ask everybody the same question. It's only going to be one question. One question final. What did you do about my offer to restore my fellowship with you? What'd you do with that? That's the question. Summary part 2. You and I will probably not live to see the end of the world, but we are all going to die. some of us sooner than others. And on the day the world does end, those of us who have already died and those who are still alive are going to be asked that same question. What did you do? What did you decide about Jesus? The question that I've got is, do you know your answer? Do you know the answer? And the answer is, our relationship with God was destroyed when Adam and Eve sinned, and it's always been that way. And God found a way to repair that relationship by sending himself, his son. And he said, my offer to you is that the broken part of you, I will substitute for the part that works in him, and he'll take that broken part. And that's my offer. 100% warranty. If you take that offer, you'll spend eternity with me. You refuse that offer, you won't be with me at all. You'll be in a much worse place. You'll think that the tribulation was actually fun based on where you're going to go there. So do you know your answer? I would love to have world peace. And one of these days when Jesus comes back and rules for 1,000 years, we really are going to have world peace. I would love to have a great, clean environment, and I would love to have everybody have plenty of money, and I'd love for there to be plenty of food and medicine and health care, and I would just love for all those things to be true, and I would spend lots of energy trying to make those things happen, and I would vote for people who said they could make them happen, they had a real plan. But at the end of the day, there's a bigger problem that we've got, and God's got an offer that I need to tell people about, and people need to decide what they want to do with that offer. So that's my job, and that's what matters most, folks. Coming soon, whether it's the end of the world or the end of your life, there's going to be a final exam with one question. I know the answer, and I think most of you know the answer as well. What I want to celebrate with you is not only do we know the answer, but we have a chance to share that answer, and it's not even called cheating. I'd like to share my paper with somebody else. That's the answer. Would you like to copy that for me? I got that. Professor doesn't care. He wants everybody to have a copy of the answer. Pray with me. Father, coming soon is the end of the world. You spoke it into creation in 7 days. Father, you're going to take it out the same way you took out the world when Noah built the ark. Except this time, instead of water, it's going to be fire. It's going to cease to exist. You've already promised that it's going to happen. But the good news is we don't have to cease to be in a relationship with you, because you came as the Messiah. You died to substitute our brokenness for your wholeness. And then you rose again so that we've got a place to spend eternity with you. And really, that's the best news ever. The end of the world sounds awful, and it will be. The end of my life, I'm really not looking forward to that much. But Father, I want to tell you, somebody sold me the answer to the exam. I got it. I understand it. Sometimes I have trouble living it. Sometimes I have trouble staying awake. Sometimes I have trouble being on the watch. But your disciples had the same problem. We all have that problem. You're the good shepherd. We're sheep. But Father, work in our hearts, work in our lives. Help us to share the answer about this offer. Because Father, for every one of us, it has an expiration date. Thank you for your love, and thank you for waiting this long to come back. You really want all of us to get the answer right. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mike.
Does everybody need help with the answer? Anybody?